And we're here with a brand new episode from of Dreamer Comics Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Spahi, and today we're joined with the incredible Mike Marts. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Omar. It's good to be back.
Good to have you here as the editor-in-chief of Aftershock Comics.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
And
New York Comic Con weekend.
Yeah.
Nothing gets more exciting than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the mecca of the shows. I think this is the largest show. It goes back and forth between San Diego, but I feel like New York actually feels like it's a bigger show.
New York feels like a bigger show because I think it's just the energy of the city that's surrounding everything. The vibe, the pace. Not to knock my California friends, but things are a bit more laid back there.
Yeah.
And here the energy is just
Hustle and bustle.
Yeah, hustle and bustle, and that's reflected in the show every year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you. I know we've kind of touched on this before, but how did you first get into editing comics?
In college, I was studying journalism and writing, and at the same time, I'd been a long-time comics fan, comics reader. And I always kind of had this drive to want to work in comic books, and Chris Claremont was my big hero growing up, and I really wanted to be Chris Claremont. I wanted to write the X-Men. So throughout college, what I would do is I would send in a new story submission each week. I would do one story submission per week, and I'd send it in to Marvel, and I would get their very polite form rejection letters that would come back to me and be like, hey, thanks, but we're okay. We're covered. But what that did, I guess my kind of perseverance and I didn't want to give up. The consistent submission of story ideas led to some actual real life contact with people at Marvel Comics, people who worked in the editorial department. So I was starting to get some actual feedback on my stories, which was extremely helpful to a 20-year-old aspiring writer.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, I was working at a comic book store all throughout college in New Jersey, and I was fortunate enough to meet an actual comic book artist, Mark McKenna, who was a longtime inker at Marvel and DC, and he was kind enough to hand deliver some of my stories to Marvel editors, so I didn't have to go through the actual mail.
You're getting it from two ways. You're getting it from the mail.
Exactly. So over the course of a few months, I started getting some real direct contact from people there, and then Mark, I think, was the one who suggested, why don't you try out for an internship there? And at that point, I didn't even know that they had internships at Marvel Comics. And then I checked it out with my journalism professor, and he was like, you can get credit for that, I was like, okay, so I can get credit and I can work at Marvel Comics. And
it's amazing.
Right, exactly. And so it was a tryout process. I mean, as you can imagine, a lot of people wanted to be an intern at Marvel Comics. But, the magic worked, and I found myself, there at the end of my junior year for my first internship at Marvel Comics. So that's more or less how I got my foot in the door there.
And then how did you transition, because you wanted to be a writer, how did you transition into editing?
I did, it kind of happened almost immediately. Up to that point, I certainly understood who the editors were. I was always a reader of the credits. Mm-hmm. So I knew all the names. And I think I had a general sense of what they did, but when I got to Marvel Comics and I was positioned with an editorial office, I was with Nell Yomtov, who was a longtime Marvel employee. I really learned the basics of comic book editing and everything that went into the behind-the-scenes, day-to-day routine of editorial. And I didn't want to do anything else. I immediately fell in love with it. And the fact that I was already studying a lot of editorial work in my journalism classes.
It seems like such a natural transition.
It was a natural transition, yeah. And I never gave up my desire to write or the need to tell stories. I just kind of transferred that energy towards towards the building of comics and the assembly of comics through the talent. To me, that was a more rewarding experience, being involved from the ground floor of something and building it.
Because it's really, you get a chance to kind of come see it come to fruition, and you get a chance to help mold it into what it becomes.
Exactly.
That's something that's really cool. A lot of people don't realize what an editor does and the importance of editors in comic books. So.
Exactly. Not to knock anyone out there, but I think a lot of people think like, oh, an editor is just making sure the spelling is okay and that things are in the right place, but it's really so much more. I mean, the editor title is actually a misnomer. It's a bit more executive producer or showrunner or general manager type of thing, to use a sports analogy.
No, it's true. It's really true. You never know, like that editor title. It's not someone who just goes in there and changes a typo and fixes stuff.
Right.
And so that led you to becoming the comics coach.
Yeah. So the comics coach, for those viewers and listeners who aren't aware of it, it's a side business that I set up to be to a coach to aspiring comic book professionals. So it's a place to get creative and constructive feedback on everything from actual finished comic issues that you've done, or pitches and outlines that you're trying to submit, to artwork. When I was coming up through the ranks, I was very fortunate to have some great teachers. Nell Yomtov, who I mentioned previously, he was my editor at Marvel Comics, and he was very much my mentor. He taught me everything there was to know about making comic books, from script editing to selecting talent to how to interact with talent, to word balloon placement, everything in between. And in addition to Nell, Mark Grunwald, everyone knows, Mark was executive editor at Marvel at the time, and he had a weekly assistant editor class where he would teach the ins and outs of what it meant to be an assistant editor and eventually what it would mean to be a Marvel Comics editor. And Mark had such a great spirit. He always made the classes fun, but you were really learning essential stuff about the making of comic books, how to make them the best way possible, and a lot of tradition that had been passed down in the decades since the industry was born. So these two guys, I think, were very instrumental in teaching me the basics and the ins and outs of how to put a comic book together. And, the educational aspect of that, passing along of knowledge, has always been important to me and near and dear to me. At my times at both Marvel and DC, whenever I had someone new join my staff, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of it to me. It was kind of the passing down of knowledge and the teaching and the instructing. I don't think it happens enough in this day and age of comics, and that may be just because everyone's at such a frantic pace all the time. But I always try to take the time to slow down and
teach people.
And
that's beautiful, and I think it's something that's a testament to, if you talk to anyone who's really broken into comics, it's you don't realize that someone has to stop and take their time and say, this person, I have to give them some time and help them kind of break in. You have to find a working professional and kind of mirror them or learn from them and go to those panels, to go to those classes and build those relationships in order to kind of make it into comics.
Yeah, exactly. And with comic books, it's such a there's a lot of people that want to be in the industry. There's only so many spots. It's not the type of thing where if you want to be an accountant, you go to college and you take certain classes. And that's how you learn to be an accountant. Working comic books is very different. People take many different paths that eventually lead towards them working in comics. So everyone's journey is a little bit different. What I do with the comics coach is I try to take into account that everyone is coming from different areas and everyone is at a different stage of their growth, a different stage of their journey. And I try to be very aware of that and accommodate people at whatever level they're at, and where they're most comfortable.
So where can people find the comics coach? Like, say you want to find the comics coach, where would you go online to find the comics coach and kind of learn more about the editing things? Because you can edit at any given stage. You can edit at the inception stage, at the seed stage, or you can edit at the finish stage. Where people go to find you?
Online, it's very simply comicscoach.com, and that's a webpage set up to give people a brief look at the different types of services that I provide. And there's also a questionnaire on there that people could fill out and give me more expanded details on what specifically they have in place already or what they aspire to do. And like I said, everyone's growth period is different. So from that questionnaire, I try to assess where people are at and then give them an idea of what I could do for them.
Yeah, as someone who's gone through the process, and I'm a giant fan, it's like night and day difference. So whenever I kind of feel this sense of like growth as I'm kind of learning. I'm like, oh wow, I should have done it that way. Oh, that makes sense. You kind of like can see if you've been doing comics, you can see, oh, that makes sense. This is why I should do it this way, and it kind of gives you a sense of learning while you're going through this whole process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the comic book creation process is a collaborative one, and working in a vacuum is never ideal.
Yeah.
But because the nature of the business and the fact that most comic book professionals are freelancers working from their homes or their studios, they may not always have the access to other creative people or other comic industry people. So that's something that I try to do. I try to provide that extra ear to listen to, eyes to look at something, second opinion, basically coaching, kind of recognizing the talents of one individual and being able to encourage the potential and guide them to whatever the next natural step should be in their creative evolution.
It's really interesting because as the creator of something, you feel this sense of pride and closeness to it, and you're like, sometimes you can't see something for what it really is, and you need a second pair of eyes to come in and say, no, like that beat you were going for, I know what you were going for, but it doesn't work. Try this way or try that way and see if that plays better, and it could work or could not work, and it's a trial and error process, but you have to know what's working and what's not working. So it's great to have somebody who's on your team who will go, okay, this is what's working, and especially someone with your experience because you've done it for so long and you're one of the best out there.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, when you're working on something so closely every day for many hours a day, it is hard to recognize the forest for the trees sometimes, and to have that extra voice, that extra set of eyes looking over your shoulder, being able to identify something and saying, you should probably move this over here, or we should probably try this scene a different way, or this line of dialogue would flow so much better if you cut out, this little section here. That's essential to making good comics. And you're right. I mean, at this point, I've been doing it for 26 odd years. Wow. And after working with so many different writers and artists, you will recognize certain patterns, good ones, and also some ones that need to be corrected. So I'm fortunate enough to have read tons of scripts over the years and put out many different comic books over the years, and I'm able to identify certain problem areas that could be corrected to make for a better comic book.
And if anyone is really serious about going out there and making a comic book, I think you're an invaluable service that you can, and you're totally accessible. You can fill out the questionnaire online, and if your stuff is good enough, you're going to take a look at it. And I think that's something that's really, really cool, that a lot of people need that help and they don't know about that.
Well, everyone starts from a different spot when they're trying to break into comics. I shared with you before, my a little bit about my beginnings, and it really pays to have someone there to kind of help you and guide you. And sometimes it could be, simple suggestion here. Sometimes it's a little more in depth. But having that extra hand to help you, to guide you, is essential. And that's what I'm trying to get back to the aspiring comic book creators today. Because I recall what it was like for me. It's a sometimes scary journey, a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles. Not everyone makes it through.
No, definitely not.
But you can get there with the right type of guidance.
That's why I'm doing the show too. I'm a huge proponent. I have 3 goals with my show. My first goal is to educate people who love comic books. I want to make sure that they're able to learn about comic books and how comic books are made, the processes, the people, just education. I want to inspire people to go out and make great books, because I love making great comics. It's one of my biggest passions in life. And my third thing is I want to entertain people. I want to go out there and just have fun with it and tell the stories from behind the scenes in comics that people kind of don't know.
Yeah. Well, those goals of your show are fairly identical to the goals of making a good comic book too.
Yeah.
So it's I can see where that translates.
I love it. And so I wanted to go back to a second to your editing days when you were an intern at Marvel and then an assistant editor there. Did you become an editor at Marvel, or did you have to switch companies first?
I switched companies. So I did 2 internships there at Marvel. I basically just didn't want to leave, and I didn't want to give them the opportunity to have me leave. So I just kind of made myself as essential as possible. I formed a very good relationship with Nel Yomtov, whose office I was working in, and was lucky enough that he was facing a assistant editor vacancy. His assistant was moving on to a different position in the company, and he had the opportunity to hire and to interview. So of course, I wanted to interview. I was still in my senior year of college at the time, and had about 12 or 15 credits that I had to finish out. So I knew that if I got the job, it was going to mean adjusting my college routine in some way. But I didn't want to pass up the opportunity of a lifetime in my dream job. My boss Nell fully understood this, and he knew this is where I wanted to be, and he made me promise to him. And Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chief at the time, made Nell promise him that I would finish college. So it was extremely important to both of them that I finish college. Yeah. So I ended up, becoming assistant editor there in late '93, and just in time for my first Marvel Christmas party, where I got to meet Stan Lee, which was pretty incredible. And Stan came up to me and he was like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Well, I'm the new assistant editor on Iron Man." And he said, "You're doing a great job." And I knew that Stan had no idea if I was doing a great job or not. But just having him say that to me and shake my hand was a great way to begin my career at Marvel Comics.
I love the enthusiasm he has, and just comes in and doesn't know who you are. And I love your work. And
he was very pleased with me, which made me very happy. So I ended up working there for 3 years as assistant editor, primarily on the West Coast Avenger related titles, things like Iron Man, War Machine, West Coast Avengers, Force Works, and then also the Fantastic Four family of titles. So at that time there was several different Fantastic Four titles. I worked on those different books as an assistant editor. And unfortunately, this was a period of time where it was kind of after the comic book glut and all the acquisitions that Marvel had made, buying Fleer and buying Skybox and Heroes World and Malibu. And the industry kind of came crashing down, and Marvel experienced a lot of contraction, and they went through 2 intense periods of layoffs. And when I started there as an assistant, I think there was like over 60 people on the editorial staff. The next year it was down to around 40.
Wow.
And then the year after that it was down to 18.
Wow. So you're talking about losing over half the company and
Exactly. So the climate of the place really changed, and I was one of those 18 people, but that's because I was making $19,000 a year. I was making peanuts as an assistant editor, so they kept me on because I'm sure I was
your value was
cheap.
way over. Yeah, your value was way over what you were getting.
But many old timers were let go, unfortunately. My boss Nell was let go, and
wow.
He had been my mentor, my partner, so that was a big change for me. And at the same time, 2 people at Marvel passed away. Mark Grunwald, who had been a teacher of mine too, and Jack Abel, who had been a long-time inker at Marvel, but he was the proofreader, and he was kind of like the grandpa uncle of the building. So for a 24-year-old, it was a rough time seeing all these people get fired.
Yeah, your mentors, you're like, oh, is this...
See my mentor leave. It had gone from that crazy, exciting time when Stan Lee was telling me I was doing a great job to the reality of corporate America. And I chose to take this moment in time to go back and finish my remaining credits in college. It was a really tough decision, but I going for my dream job, I voluntarily decided to leave and go finish my degree. That only took a few months, and then I found myself kind of needing to get back into the comic book industry. At the time, my old boss Nell had found a position in the marketing licensing department at DC Comics, and he introduced me to every single editor up at DC, and I think I interviewed for about 4 or 5 different assistant editor spots there, with Mike Carlin, with Casey Carlson, with Dan Raspler, with Dan Thorsland. Then I had an interview with the marketing department with Bob Wayne and Patty Cheris. All those assistant editor spots at DC went to other people, most of them internal, I think. But the interview I had with Patty Cheris in the marketing department, she liked me enough that she recommended me to Wizard Entertainment. So my first job back in comics was at Wizard Entertainment.
And this was Wizard Magazine?
Yeah, Wizard Magazine, and I went there to become their promotions and publicity manager.
All right, what did you do as the promotions and publicity manager for Wizard?
That was an interesting journey. My time at Wizard was short-lived. I know by now that I'm not too bad of an editor in comics, but guess who wasn't very good at publicity and promotions? This guy. But it was a job in comics, and I was very happy to have it, and it paid better than what I had been making at Marvel the previous year. In that position, I was in charge of doing contests in the magazine, promotional giveaways like the Ace editions they used to do, or the half issues they used to do.
I have a few of those myself.
Right? Yeah, they were fun. The exclusive action figures that they did for Toy Fair magazine. This was all stuff that I was involved in. And I was very lucky to kind of been tutored in this job by Jim McLaughlin, who had the position right before me. But I knew a few months in that I was, not doing a very good job. It wasn't for me. I tried a few times to get into editorial at Wizard, but I wasn't making much traction there. And then eventually, about 9 months in, they let me go.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this was probably my darkest period in my career. After having the dream job at Marvel and deciding to leave to go finish my college degree, and then feeling lucky enough to get a job back in comics, 9 months later I was done. fired.
Wow.
And I pretty much thought it was over at that point. So I went home, commiserated with my then girlfriend, and wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I woke up the next morning, and there was a phone call. It was from Jimmy Palmiotti, who had become a friend of mine, not only at Marvel but also at Wizard. And he said, "Listen, Fabian Nicieza, who was editor-in-chief and publisher at Acclaim Comics at the time, he said, Fabian has an open editorial spot. You should go down and interview." And I was like, "I'll go down today." And I'd known Fabian from my days at Marvel, and Fabian was always friendly with me and helpful to me. He was one of the early editors who helped critique my stories when I was breaking in.
Was this literally the day after?
Day after.
Wow.
Day after. And this is before, like, email was in wide use, and, you know, it wasn't like I didn't, you know, go online that night and like, "Hey, I need a job," you know. But Jimmy had heard, and Jimmy was always making connections and networking, and he did this for me. So I went down, I interviewed with Fabian, and it was actually for an associate editor job, so this was a step up for me. And Fabian said to me, you know, "Listen, basically, you know, Mike, you know, if you want this job, it's yours, but I can't guarantee Acclaim Comics is going to be here in 6 months, and I can't guarantee that we're going to be in this building in 6 months." I was like, I still want the job, you know, because this was a tough time in comics, like it always is.
Yeah.
You know?
But this time especially because this was right as the bubble had burst with Image and the death of Superman, and,
Right.
and Marvel was going through its bankruptcies and
Exactly. This, it was all this time. This is right now. This is about 1997, and Fabian had been at Acclaim for a little bit, and he had done some exciting stuff by bringing Garth Ennis and Kurt Busiek and Mark Waid, you know, a few other popular writers to kind of rejuvenate the line. And I'd always been a fan of the Valiant characters. I bought all those when Jim Shooter and Barry Windsor Smith were launching the company, Bob Layton. So this was very attractive to me. It was great. And I went down there, and I started working there. Loved it. I was working on Exo Man-O-War and Shadow Man and Trinity Angels and a bunch of other exciting books. And I really, you know, I figured I'd found a home. And pretty much 6 months to the day after I was hired, Fabian had this big company meeting, and said, "Listen, Acclaim Corporate, the video game company, has decided to reduce our staff from 35 to 7.
wow.
We're closing the Manhattan office, and those of us that remained are going to be moving out to Long Island and working from their corporate headquarters." So this was like pretty devastating to the company. I was lucky enough to be one of those 7 people that Fabe chose to keep on, and suddenly I found myself working in Long Island.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's great.
for Acclaim Comics. Yeah, and that it was a strange transitional time. Acclaim Corporate didn't really know what to make of this little comic book company that they had spent $65 million on a few years before. It definitely wasn't bringing them
$65 million.
No. I mean, you know, they did some great Turok video games, and they did a Shadow Man video game, but it didn't turn out to be the investment that they thought it would be. We scaled back our production. We were only putting out a few books per month. They weren't selling many copies. And little by little, those 7 people that had been asked to join said, "I'm going to go try something else." And Fabian ended up leaving. Couldn't blame him at all. It was a really tough spot for him to be in. But me and another editor, Omar Van Mali, we stayed on because we loved comics, and we loved what we were doing. And this was probably the best period of time for my growth as a comic book editor. At that point in time, I was promoted to editor, so that's where I became editor.
Mm-hmm.
I was working at Acclaim. And with everyone jumping ship and leaving, not only did I have to edit the comics, but I did the production work on the comics. I did the marketing work on the comics. I was dealing with printers. I was basically
all.
doing everything. I was doing my own budgets. And Acclaim Corporate gave us the freedom and flexibility to do a few books, and we tried to do the best we could with those books. But it was a great learning period for me. Not only doing editing, but learning all the other aspects.
And you had to. So
had to.
You had no choice. I mean, you had to, it was sink or swim.
Exactly.
We're going to figure out how to talk to the printer. We didn't know, and you're
Right.
going to figure out how to, work with the talent and get new talent and get everything cultivated. And that's amazing.
Yeah. So this was a growth period and a learning period. Like you say, it was sink or swim. And I think that period of time really led towards what eventually I did with the Aftershock, where I, wanted to build a company because I could understand all the different aspects of what it meant to build a comic book company. I was happy there at Acclaim. I was moved out to Long Island, got an apartment there, had creative freedom on these books, enjoyed the creators I was working with. They weren't selling much, but we were really proud of them. And I thought, I'd have a home there. And the day after I moved out to Long Island and got an apartment out in Long Island, making this commitment to be out there, the day after, the phone rings, and it's Jimmy Palmiotti on the phone. And Jimmy says, hey, Bob Harras has an opening back at Marvel in the X-Men office. He's going to give you a call. I was like, okay.
I love it.
And so Bob calls me. He's like, Mike, I got there's an opening in the X-Men office. We got $1 million bucks. I don't know what we're gonna do. Can you come down and talk about it? I was like, man, I'll be there tomorrow. So I went in and interviewed with Bob and talked to Mark Powers and Jason Liebig were the other two X-Men editors at the time. We went out to lunch and essentially, again, it was a kind of a, if you want this job, it's yours type of thing, and I certainly did want it. I was, I felt like I was coming back home.
Yeah. Especially growing up with the X-Men and Claremont's run,
yes.
and you had an intern there, so you already felt like you knew the landscape.
Exactly, yeah. And the first time around, I didn't have the opportunity to work on any of the X-Men books. And now this was a chance to come back and not only work with the books, but be an X-Men editor. So that was extremely cool. And Bob Harras was someone that I always admired. He had been my boss briefly towards the end of my first stint at Marvel. I was happy to have him as my boss again, and I was really happy to be back at Marvel. I really felt like I was coming home, and in the beginning I was working on the kind of satellite X-Men books like Gambit and Bishop and Wolverine, a lot of the solo characters and Deadpool. I did Black Panther, and this was great. I was working on heroes and characters I always wanted to work on, working with great creators. It was very good to be back at Marvel. And about a year into that, there was a change in the presidency at Marvel, and they made some changes, and Bob Harras was let go. Unfortunately, Joe Quezada came in as boss, and Joe had always been someone that I was friendly with through my Wizard days and everything. So it was a huge loss not to have Bob there. But I felt lucky that Joe was coming in as my new boss, and I respected Joe's vision, everything he had done on the Marvel Knights books, and now he was coming in as editor-in-chief. So that was a very exciting time, not only for me, but for the company as
Absolutely.
well. It was a real turning point, and people saw the big creative changes that happened at that point in time. Brian Bendis coming in, and kind of a shift in the mode of publishing. And Joe was very supportive of me, and that next, that second stint at Marvel for me lasted 7 years. And
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
During this time, Marvel was kind of in a dark place when they had gone with Joe Quesada.
Right.
And so when Joe came in, he kind of was like, hey, listen, he was kind of in the same position that Fabian was in maybe when you kind of started at Acclaim, where he was like, I don't know if I'm going to be around for 6 months. What do you think he did that turned Marvel around? Or like, what do you think that the whole team kind of at Marvel did that kind of turned Marvel from being like, okay, we might go out of business in 6 months to bring it back into...
I think that Joe's attitude was actually different. I don't think Joe ever thought that he wouldn't be there in 6 months. I think that Joe came in and he said, we're gonna change course on this ship and make a difference and bring in the people that we need, and we're gonna survive and thrive. I think that was always his attitude, and I don't think he ever doubted that. And if he did, it didn't trickle down to the staff or the creators. But it was a difficult time because it was a difficult time for some people at Marvel because there was still, I guess, a good portion of editorial and creators that were legacy people that had been around for a long time and had worked under the Jim Shooter and Tom DeFalco and Bob Harris eras, and this was a big switch, and not everyone was able to adapt to that on both the creative end and on the staff end. So there was a few years of transition there that were difficult for some, and we didn't really know where we were headed. But the company started really turning itself around. With the Marvel Knights attitude shifting towards the books, and the X-Men movie coming out, and then the promise of some other the Spider-Man movie coming out. How we confronted 9/11 and turned that into a very positive thing for the company and to the comics community. All those things together kind of helped propel us in a good direction. And it was a very good time for me professionally. Not too long into my return to Marvel, or I transitioned from being the satellite X-Men editor to the primary, main X-Men group editor, and then was able to work with Grant Morrison and Joss Whedon. Got to work with Chris Claremont, my hero.
That's amazing. That's the dream come true, with working with Claremont and these legends and doing all these new legendary runs, because I know Grant Morrison's run on X-Men was legendary as well, and so it's so cool that you were there and able to propel the next generation of X-Men fans forward, just like you were propelled and kind of brought into comics that way.
Yeah.
So at what point did you kind of switch over from, because I know you were there for 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you kind of switch over and go in a different way?
In 2006, I developed a friendship with Dan DiDio, and Dan had just started at DC. He'd been there a few years, and he was really making changes there and making a difference. And for the first time in a long time, Marvel was really feeling the pressure from DC that the books are good. They've got good creators there. There's energy. They're doing these events, and it was people knew that it was the energy that Dan had brought to the table over there. I admired it from afar, and because I lived in New Jersey and Dan lived in New Jersey, we would always find ourselves on the same flights out to San Diego or Chicago or whatever convention was going on. So I kind of became like an airport buddy with Dan. And also we would see each other at like the Marvel DC softball games, and we would chat there. I knew Dan kind of took a liking to me, and I liked him, and I liked what he was representing, what he was about. I wasn't that familiar with the DC universe beyond Batman, but I was very intrigued by what he was doing. And then one day I got either a call or email from him, and he was like, I'm able to make my first outside editorial hire since I've been here. I'm like, okay. He's like, maybe it could be you. So I interviewed with Dan, and in a very typical Dan way, he didn't really say that this job was going to be the Batman group editor, but he kept kind of hinting at it. and so I was flattered and intrigued, and at that point in time at Marvel, I felt like I'd done a lot. I brought a lot to the X-Men line. I had just hired on Ed Brubaker and Mike Carey to the books, and I felt like they were in a really good spot. And I had a good staff working underneath me, and I kind of felt like, I'd done a good amount there, and it was time to try something new. And so I made the jump to DC, and I came on as a senior editor there. And about 6 months into being there, Dan transferred all the Batman titles to me, and I became the Batman group editor. He knew the whole time it was going to happen because Pete Tomasi had been the editor before me, and Pete was leaning towards going full-time freelance, which was a great move for him. He's a brilliant writer.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites.
Yeah, but very good for me,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so big thanks to Pete. And so I became the Batman group editor there. I was doing that for all of my 8 years at DC, and that was by far the most rewarding editorial professional experience for me. It was working at DC Comics and working on Batman.
Because you were there during the launch for the New 52.
Yep.
So you were a big instrumental part in creating those Batman books that are so legendary. And
Yep. Yeah. I mean, all the different Grant Morrison arcs, and I was involved in, whether Batman Robin, Batman Incorporated, Batman R.I.P., working with Paul Dini during that time, and then this new writer Scott Snyder came in, so being there with Scott at the beginning, working with him and Greg Capullo, all that stuff, and working with Pete with Tomasi.
How did Scott and Greg end up on the Batman title?
So we had this thing called the War Room, which was this very small, very suffocating little room with no windows and few vents that Dan DiDio had as kind of like a planning room. There's a big whiteboard and everything. And we didn't really use it that much until we started talking about the New 52. And we went in there in the New 52, and we had a million different index cards. And they were different writers and different artists and different characters. And we just started mixing and matching and, putting up, Batman, written by this person, drawn by this person. And it was Dan and the four group editors. And we just kept working at it. And originally someone else was going to be writing Batman when we were doing these index cards, someone besides Scott. And we were kind of a few months deep into Scott's Black Mirror storyline on Detective, and it was doing extremely well, getting a lot of reorders on it. And then we thought about Scott doing Batman. And at the same time, Dan had been working very hard to recruit Greg Capullo, bringing him into DC. And it just became a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Putting Greg on Batman and having Scott write it. In the beginning, though, it wasn't so automatic, thinking about Scott, because, he was doing well, but he hadn't really become that premier writer yet. But, we rolled the dice and took a chance. And, Greg and Scott have, chronicled their history together pretty well. In the beginning, it wasn't all hugs and kisses. It was a little bit rocky in the beginning. And being both, their editor, it was challenging at times to try to get these two great talents to work together. But the two of them really found the rhythm. I can't take too much credit for massaging things. They really found a rhythm together. And, a bunch of years later, they're best of friends, and
the rest is history.
Have done dozens of books together, so that's. I
love it. Now, one thing I'm super excited to talk about is after DC, you came over and became the editor-in-chief for Aftershock. And so I wanted you to kind of tell me about how that kind of came to be and what the process was.
Yeah, it was interesting. Because DC is owned by Warner Brothers, there was always this kind of looming danger threat that they might move the offices out to Los Angeles, and it was exciting to some people and kind of scary to others.
Of course.
I'd lived in New Jersey and the New York area my whole life, and had bought a house out there, and I have a daughter, and the idea of moving out to Los Angeles was not all that great to me.
Yeah.
And it was really, and then they made the decision that they were going to do that and move the office out there. And to DC and Warner Brothers' credit, they really made it, the offer was very good. And they really wanted to take care of their people. And they really wanted to take as many people out there as they could. And it was very difficult to turn them down because I loved working for the company. I loved working on Batman. I loved Dan as a boss, and at that point, Bob Harris had, become the editor-in-chief there. So Bob was my boss again. I loved working for both those guys, and for Jim Lee. But I wasn't able to do it, and thankfully at that time, Dan Buckley, president at Marvel, was a very good friend of mine, and they were doing some transitioning and moving around the positions. Steve Wacker had been promoted and was moving out to Los Angeles to head up a new job there. So there was an editorial vacancy at Marvel, and they were great to take me back and brought me back as an executive editor. I got to briefly work on the X-Men again for a year and work with Bendis, which was great because for a long time, Brian and I had joked that, we'd been at the same company for a long time, but had never worked together. And then, in the short space of a year plus, I probably did like 36 or 40 issues with him.
Wow.
2 X-Men books and Guardians of the Galaxy. So
that's crazy.
So that was great. And coming back to Marvel at that time was really cool. The X-Men were doing a lot of fun stuff, and Guardians of the Galaxy, of course, was already a popular franchise, but the movie was just on the verge of coming out, so it was very exciting. But to be honest, I came back. It was a different Marvel. Marvel had changed. I had changed. I don't think I fit in as well there as I thought I would. It didn't feel as much as like a returning home as I thought it would. And who knows why that was? If it was the after effects of Disney taking over Marvel, or just that I had changed or whatever. But I felt I came in, did some good books for a little while, and I was very, very thankful for Dan Buckley giving me that chance to come back again. But in the midst of all that, this Aftershock opportunity came up, and I got a Facebook message over Christmas, New Year's break from Joe Pruitt. And Joe had been a long friend of mine in the industry. He'd written some stuff for me at Marvel 20 years ago, and I always liked Joe, always respected Joe. And Joe was like, listen, I'm getting together with some guys. We're going to put together a comic book company. We're looking for someone to, head the creative, head the editorial. I know it's probably a long shot, but maybe you'd be interested. And, in my mind, this wasn't really a long shot.
Yeah.
I was, feeling the kind of career unease at Marvel, not really thinking that I was the right fit for them anymore. And like I said earlier, I kind of always was leaning towards building something and building a company, and being the group editor on X-Men for a long time and Batman for a long time kind of helped me assemble all these different,
skill sets for
wanting to, to build something bigger, for managing something bigger. And so I went to meet with Joe and the guys that ended up becoming my partners, John Kramer and Lee Kramer. And John and Lee were from Hollywood, and initially there's that kind of trepidation, like, is this a company that's just out to, make a quick buck or turn things into movies or whatever. But I met with John and Lee, and that was really the turning point. I realized that they had a long-term vision, that Lee was a lifelong comics fan and knew the industry in and out, and they wanted to build a publishing company. And to me, this was ideal. This was a set of partners that had the infrastructure in place to start a company and to allow it to continue. So there was stability there, and them basically saying, we respect your vision, what you've done in the past at Marvel and DC, want to see what you can do for us, and the opportunity to work alongside Joe Pruitt, who had been someone I respected for an extremely long time. So that was kind of the infancy of Aftershock, and how it came together. I was the last piece of the puzzle, the last of the partners to
come in.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Now, how did you guys, when you were getting involved, what were the books that you guys were talking about launching with? What was like the launch strategy for you guys when you're talking about building a company? And I know you guys launched, I think, with 6 titles? How many titles?
Well, the first month we put out 4 titles, but there were, I guess, 6 that were in the first 2 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
It was a combination, I think, of higher end, more experienced creators that we had good relationships with. Joe had a really good relationship with Garth Ennis. We knew we wanted to launch with him. Brian Azzarello was interested in doing a project with us. And Paul Jenkins was someone that had worked a long time with both me and Joe. And then, we wanted some fresh voices as well. And Marguerite Bennett was someone that I had given her first work to at DC, and that she did some work for me at Marvel. I knew that she was a star in the making. So she was someone that we approached in the beginning. And then Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor, longtime friends of me and Joe, and they were 2 people that we wanted to partner with as well. So that kind of group of 5 or 6 writers were meant to be the launch, and we're going to launch with those 5 titles. Brian's American Monster was a bit delayed, so that ended up coming out the second month as opposed to the first. But we consider those 5 books that those creators did as our launch.
That's crazy. And what was your vision with your launch? Were you kind of like, okay, we're going to let did creators come and pitch you things, or did you kind of have an idea of what you were thinking of for different stories, or what was?
It was a little bit of both. Garth had a very specific idea. He had this project, Dreaming Eagles, that he had been developing for a while and wanted to tell it somewhere. So that was more or less kind of an idea that was already in place when he came to us. Likewise with Super Zero, which Jimmy and Amanda did, it was something that they had been developing on their own for a while, and we were lucky that they brought it to us. Replica that Paul Jenkins did was something he developed. I think there was maybe even 1 or 2 other ideas that Paul was considering at the time, but Replica was the one that we decided to go with. Marguerite, she pitched us several different things. I think 3 titles in the beginning. Insects was the one that she was positive we were not going to accept.
And that's the one.
That's the one that we immediately jumped on. Yeah, I'm so happy that we did. And I forget who I'm leaving out.
You went through Azzarello, Palmiotti.
An American Monster with Azzarello. That was something I think that he had been developing for a while too. So it was a little bit of mix and match. Some asking people to pitch and some asking
what you had and seeing like, okay, this works. It's a conversation that kind of happens and happens in a natural way.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys continue to hire the top talent in comics. You guys are working with Steve Orlando, who's writing, Martian Manhunter now and everything in DC, Justice League of America. Ryan Parrott, who's one of my personal favorites with Go-Go Power Rangers, and a lot of great creators. Like, what kind of drives people? What drives you to go and make these connections with these amazing creators?
Some are people that we've known for a long time and that we've worked with and that we enjoy working with. Frank Thierry, I've probably done more books with him than any other writer in my career. Other creators are, unique voices, people that we've recognized to have a voice unlike anyone else. I don't think people have read much from Ted Anderson or Patrick Kindlon yet, but both of those gentlemen have voices that are extremely distinct and different and unique from everyone else. And it becomes a mix and match. Someone like Steve Orlando was probably someone that we would have gotten to soon because we love what he's been doing at DC the past few years. Steve came to us and he was like, "Hey, I've heard about you guys. I've heard good things. I want to do something with you." And we were more than delighted.
Yeah, of course. Let's see what you got.
Yeah. And then other people, are individuals who have done great creator-owned work at other companies. Justin Jordan, Zach Thompson, and Lonnie Nadler. The list goes on. I mean, it's funny to think at this point, our small group of writers at the beginning of 5 or 6 people has grown to over 40 different creative teams, and then a bunch more that are in the wings, waiting to happen that we haven't announced yet.
But that's super exciting and super cool. Now I want to go back to the Comic Coach for a quick second.
Mm-hmm.
And the Comic Coach, I wanted to talk about what was it like? Like what kind of what did you learn at becoming an editor, from all the way from assistant editor to associate producer to editor, that you were able to take and kind of take it to the Comics Coach and really help people develop their craft?
A lot of it I think is repetition of the creation of a comic. I think on average I've probably put out 2 or 3 books per week.
Wow, per week, not even per month.
Per week for the past 25 years. So in putting out thousands of comics at this point, you really refine the craft and know what works and what doesn't work. So a lot of it, what started as experience becomes instinct, and you do certain things so many times and know what works and doesn't work. It then becomes easy to apply that in the educational process and instructing others, because what seemed as a question a long time ago has now become a rule.
Of course.
It's you come from an area of experience and confidence, knowing what works and what doesn't, and you feel comfortable passing that on to others. So even the stuff that I was doing as an assistant was sometimes guesswork and learning. Then going up to editor, to senior editor, group editor, executive editor, editor-in-chief, it becomes just part of it. Of course, it's rules.
It's rules, and you pick it up along the way. And someone goes, "How could you let that one go?" And you go, "Oh, I didn't know that was a thing." And that's how you learn, and you learn from the process and the mistakes. And all of a sudden, you go, "Okay, that'll never happen again." And
right.
You make sure that you fix it and you make it perfect.
Right. And the rules are flexible too. The rules change, and what sometimes might work for one type of creator may not work for another. So you have to be self-aware all the time and be able to bend and be flexible and to learn from others.
So as an editor, are you going through and are you getting, first of all, we know you get the team together, but do you go through and you get the writer and get the script from them and go through and make some notes and make some changes, and then do you go in and get some pages in from the artist and then say, okay, I like this, I don't like this, and then you get the inker say, oh, this is works, this doesn't work, and then you go to the colorist, and at every every page, every step, are you involved, or is it with different people? There's different level of trust over the years that you're kind of like.
The answer to the question is yes. Every single page, every single step of the way of creating a comic, my eyes see
Wow.
and review in some way. But what you said at the end there, that there's many creators that I've worked with over the years that I've learned to, I developed a sense of trust, and when I get a Garth Ennis script in, I of course read it from start to finish, but 99 times out of 100, that script is going to be pristine and ready to go. And if I spot something, it's
Tiny.
it's rare.
Yeah.
There are other writers that are younger, newer, less experienced, and welcome the input and welcome the critiques. And there's a writer that we had been talking to the past few years, and they have a series that just came out a few months ago. And with them, there was quite a big amount of workshopping that went into their book. I think the end results were fantastic. I think they're very happy with it. I think they're happy that we were able to provide that input and coaching. So it depends on the creator, depends on the book. But yeah, everything that comes in, I see and review in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of times it's like, yep, that looks good.
Mm-hmm,
But other times there's
stuff that needs to get reworked.
new artists. Lately we've had a few great new artists start with us who have done outstanding work. But the first time you start off with anybody, you don't know how it's going to go. So we ask for layouts first before finished pencils, and we see the layouts, and myself and my managing editor and the writer will often give notes and constructive criticism on how to make a page better.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I have one final question for you.
Sure.
You probably know it, but what advice do you have for any aspiring people who want to break into comics?
I would say perseverance is one of the key elements to breaking into comics. You have to learn how to receive the word no many different times. You're going to hear no. You're going to say you hear no, thank you. Sometimes from some people you might hear worse, like this sucks, this is boring. I personally don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't think I think criticism should be constructive. But it's a very tough road. Like I said earlier, there are many people looking to get into this industry. There are only so many spots.
Yeah.
And you have to be persistent. You have to know when to draw the line, when to take a step back, and not be so pushy.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be different with every editor or art director you encounter. But the persistence, you have to remember this is your dream. You're a creative person. Believe in your abilities and keep trying.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much.